If this is the first video you've seen from me, or you've been following this channel and somehow not noticed, I'm quite a big Spider-Man guy. I know that's not a crazy take, but I think I can confidently say I'm a pretty big Spider-Man guy. I've read my fair share of the comics, I've got the merch, I'm obsessed with the films, I work at a comic book store and talk about him. I'm unfortunately deeply invested in the guy. If you watched my recently released video on my favorite movie from every year I've been alive, you'd see that Spider-Man made 3 appearances on that list. And for many years of my life, Spider-Verse was my answer for my favorite film without fail. That's all to say, my expectations for these movies are huge. Even with my recent issues with Marvel, I found myself unable to avoid the hope that Spider-Man could be good again. Well, was it? Let's talk about it. Warning. There will be vague story beat and narrative structure spoilers in this video. I'll let you know when I get into actual hard and meaningful story spoilers, but I will broadly discuss aspects and choices that did or didn't work for me throughout the video. Spider-Man Brand New Day, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, is the 4th installment in the MCU Spider-Man saga, and the first film in Holland's second Spider-Man trilogy. Fresh off the memory-erasing events of No Way Home, Peter Parker finds himself alone and depressed, spending most of his nights as Spider-Man and struggling with how to maintain the balance between Spider and Man. For a little more context, I'm somewhat a fan of Holland's previous Spider-Man trilogy. I think Spider-Man Homecoming absolutely rules and is totally underrated. Far From Home is a good Spider-Man movie trapped in another country, and No Way Home is fine until it becomes a bit unbearable, then is fine again. In recent years, people have definitely come around to Holland's trilogy, but I've always liked the guy and his performance. I guess it sort of feels like I'm trying to soften the blow, so I should just say that I'm saying all that because, to be frank, I didn't really like this movie all that much. Brand New Day is sort of promised to be everything that the Home trilogy wasn't. Even as someone who likes some of those movies more than the general consensus, I even felt like it was with caveats or exceptions. Like, I was accepting that these films were not going to be the traditional Spider-Man narrative or setup. This movie promised to change that. We'd see a much more alone, depressed, and street-level Spider-Man. And this movie does deliver on that well. In the opening, we see Spider-Man stopping a lot of bank robberies, lower-level villains, and interacting with the New York around him. It reminded me a lot of the opening of Homecoming, a movie that has Peter involved in much lower stakes crimes and run-ins, as well as gives him a few New York regulars to play off of at the beginning. However, my problem is that Brand New Day does not deliver on the New York it promises us. This is the most New York has ever felt alive in a Holland movie, but it just wasn't really enough for me. There's a thematic note that's hit with New York loving Spider-Man near the end, and while my personal preference is that he has a shifting love-hate relationship with the city, I just didn't feel that the movie fully even expresses the love relationship enough. I hate to compare this film to the Raimi trilogy, but this movie is really attempting in many ways to sort of be like Spider-Man 2, and I think that film firmly does a better job of establishing New York as a character. Peter and the city feel in conflict and in begrudging harmony, in a way that makes the subway scene feel so earned when it finally happens. This movie also reminded me of Amazing Spider-Man 1, which has a similar final New York coming together scene, and also similarly, just wasn't fully earned for me. There's a scene where this idea is verbally reinforced in a flashback, and I think there it sort of won me over, but I think that's mostly because the actors in that scene are really incredible. The movie needs just a little more Peter saving like babies, stopping bike thieves. It has some of that stuff, but I just needed a little more of it. In general, I think this movie fails to land a lot of what it's going for thematically. Peter is depressed, we see it, we're told about it, and Holland's wonderful work here illustrates it pretty well. However, the conflict between Peter Parker and Spider-Man doesn't feel fully illustrated here. I understand the movie is saying Peter is only being Spider-Man, that there is barely a life outside of Spider-Man to see, and I think that it's a really interesting concept, but I wanted to see a bit more of the life he is neglecting. The movie kinda yells this at you with the man spider stuff, which also is an interesting gimmick, but I found it to be a bit grating how much the film is insistent on telling you what's happening, rather than letting the genuinely competent filmmaking in those sections speak for itself. We also get this with the romance and MJ side, but I want to see Peter let down his job, or landlord. Once again, Spider-Man 2, for example, pretty much nails this excruciating give and go in its opening sequence. Peter can't lose his job, but being Spider-Man gets in the way. There's a clear conflict. I understand this film is tackling it in a slightly different way, but Peter feels too removed for the loss to feel impactful or honestly, I think be felt at all. I want to see a rent notice, or Peter losing a job or getting chewed out. The world feels a bit more alive, but Peter doesn't feel like that much of a part of it, and not in a way that I think the story was fully intentionally going for. This film is telling Peter to remember the balance between Spider and man, and I think the film ironically doesn't really handle the balance properly either. The first act, I should say, does work, and actually had me really hopeful. It's landing a lot of this stuff, and I was assuming everything I was hoping for would be coming and would continue. But the opening is exciting. The opening Spider-Man action scenes are pretty fun. I was a bit giddy that this film opened on a pseudo homage to the Raimi films. There were genuinely points where I was nodding my head and felt like they were really getting it. He does my favorite thing, which is watching a superhero save someone. I think way more superhero movies should feature the hero saving people, and this movie has at least 2 sequences that feature it. I should note that for all my problems, there are aspects of this movie I did like a lot. All of the performances in this movie are great for starters. I noted in my Odyssey review, but I've never been the biggest fan of Holland as an actor. I've always liked him in this role, but I've thought it was an exception in he's just good as Spider-Man. He is genuinely really impressive here again, and I think a huge reason Peter's arc even works at all is because Holland is so great at playing sad and vulnerable. You just want to give the guy a hug so bad. Zendaya is also really terrific here. She has very little to work with in the grand scheme of the movie, but she does nail literally every scene she's in. Once again, I found that aspect of Spider-Man's arc and her entire section in like the second act of the movie to be really great and really won me over. I think it's largely because she's helping to sell it. What a great year for them. I always liked Trammell. Jacob Batalon definitely was a bit iffy at first, but got better and won me over. Bernthal was great, and Ruffalo is really always locked into whatever they hand the guy. I have to admit, the performance that really surprised me was Sadie Sink. I've never been a huge fan of her as an actress. I found her role and performance in both Stranger Things and The Whale to just not work and be frustrating at points, particularly The Whale, so my expectations were quite low. I think she is genuinely really good here though, and no spoilers on the totally mysterious and not obvious character she plays, but I think she really does a good job, and I'd be pretty okay and honestly happy to see her in the role again. The movie looks alright, it has some moments that look really good, and most of the action scenes are pretty great. Nothing has topped the Washington Monument set piece for me in this series, but I enjoyed watching Peter fight, and the wire work is much appreciated. That last fight and the tank chase are pretty good. I will say Marvel still has that lighting problem sometimes, and boy do some of those skylines look gray. But there are some genuinely good looking scenes, like his encounter with the Scorpion at night. He looks good in the suit, and for a change, looks like a real guy in the suit actually, which does add a lot and makes Spider-Man feel more down to earth. I do love him in Punisher. I had some problems with this movie clearly feeling like 3 scripts or 3 major drafts being Frankenstein together in some aspects, but man, the parts with Frank and Peter are my favorite. Holland and Bernthal play off each other really well, and it's the most textured and grounded Peter feels to me in the movie. Spider-Man feels connected to the world most to me when interacting with Punisher, and it's because it's the only time the film lets Peter interact with the character that sort of feels like he would be part of his world. I compared this to a lot of superhero movies when discussing it with my friends I saw it with, but Superman from last year was one I thought of a lot. A movie that made Superman feel textured and part of something huge and grand without feeling forced or unnatural. He meshed with his grander world, and it meshed with the film in Superman. This movie is attempting to do that in a few ways, and it worked best when Spider-Man was with Punisher. It felt like Superman did. Alright, I gotta talk about the twists. Skip to this point if you haven't seen the movie and don't want serious story spoilers. So the reveal of who Sadie Sink is playing felt a bit obvious even before Steve Lacy spoiled it. I was always upset because, like I said, I'm not a huge Sadie Sink guy, but she's good. The problem I somewhat ignored or didn't consider as much is how out of place Jean Grey is in a Spider-Man movie. I'm not even saying this from a Spider-Man fan perspective. The script and story frames her story and Peter's in a way that does make it feel like there is a clear connection, but even then, I think this movie somehow misses that mark. Peter's struggles are internal and with personal image. Peter is ashamed and scared to tell MJ. We get told this when MJ finds the note and confronts him with the harsh fact that it wasn't protecting her as much as it was him to keep that secret and hide himself. While that scene is good and Holland and Zendaya kill it, it's what makes Peter and Jean Grey's arcs feel too disconnected for me. Jean has been scrutinized and doesn't have self-doubt as much as she has pretty reasonable belief that the world is out for her. Peter should teach her not to kill, I guess, and I understand why they think they connect, but it doesn't feel like Jean has anything to learn from him. And that's confusing when Jean is basically the pseudo-protagonist of the third act. There are multiple sequences that are just fully Jean and feel like a different movie or, to be frank, Stranger Things, but that's a different conversation. Part of the reason I harped on the relationship to New York thing earlier is this message and connection between Jean and Peter might work better if Peter also has a thorny relationship with New York or a boss, for example. But Peter's battle is different, and so I didn't really feel the thematic connection between them, which is the only reason Jean would fit in this movie. Also, I've tried to avoid pointing out any fan complaints because these movies aren't really made for me or the type of fan I am, which is totally fine, and I'm not here to complain and moan about like people do. That doesn't upset me, but it is upsetting to see a terrific rogues gallery wasted, and more specifically, to narratively see Peter continually so disconnected from his villains. Raimi nailed this. And even if the villains were good, Garfield's villains felt more personal connected. Holland feels just a bit too disconnected from Jean for me. For the most part, I found myself enjoying Brand New Day enough. I liked the first act a lot, I was into the second act a bit, but by the beginning of the third act, it really set in for me. This movie isn't landing or likely going to land for me. It's fun enough, and has definitely won audiences over, but a Spider-Man movie shouldn't just be enough. These things are a damn spectacle when done right. And no, I don't need him to repeat the Raimi trilogy or up the scale, but even Homecoming feels like it takes Tom's Spider-Man much further as a character. Holland is the first Spider-Man to make it to 4 movies, and the only superhero actor to get 4 solo films other than Hemsworth's Thor. There's a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, but more than that, Holland's Spider-Man has also continued to bear the weight of the rest of the MCU, whether it be the sins of Tony Stark in his first 2 films, the villains of franchises past in No Way Home, or now planting the seeds for whatever the next phase of the MCU is. Spider-Man's always got a little more on his plate than whatever the villain of the week is. But for all the great power the guy has, I think it's fair we ask the MCU to give the guy a little less responsibility and a little more independence for once. Is it too much to ask for a Spider-Man movie that's mostly about the Spider-Man in it? That's about going to do it for this one. So as always, thank you for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on Letterboxd and Substack, and go see Brand New Day and tell me how I'm wrong or something.